Watch this video on Nebula for the best ad-free experience and to get instant access to The Space Game Paradox, an exclusive companion video exploring the unique challenges of gamifying infinity. Have you ever seen one of those universe comparison videos? You know, the ones that will show you the Earth right next to the other planets in our solar system, gradually moving up in size until eventually making that giant leap to fit in the Sun. It never fails to leave me amazed and a little dumbstruck as I try to grasp the true scale of these comparative differences, especially when, as these videos often do, they keep going, expanding further into the cosmos, towards the red giants, supergiants, hypergiants and black holes that reduce the entirety of our own solar system into mere pixels, until ultimately erasing them altogether by reaching a scale so vast and so incomprehensible that the whole concept of size becomes pretty much meaningless. Because if you're already long past the point of too big to imagine, where can these comparisons really take us, except for into the realm of total abstraction, a measurement of that which cannot be measured, not in a truly meaningful way at least. And yet, as I watch these videos continuously double down on the absurd, I can't help but feel strangely mesmerized. Even after having lost all sense of size, I somehow still find myself becoming smaller with each leap, and increasingly yearning for some kind of understanding, for some way to reconcile my limited perception with what is essentially the infinite. And it's that same longing, that same gravitational pull that draws me towards space cinema, towards the movies that set course for the stars, and that offer their own method of comparison, one less rooted in numeric metrics, and more so in narrative, art, and poetry, to also try and position humanity within an unimaginably large frame, and to face the deep existential questions that arise from it.
The mystery of life isn't a problem to solve, but a reality to experience.
And you can start PTC at your convenience.
All right, thank you, Houston.
Movies too struggle to capture the sheer scale of the universe and to place its grandeur in a perspective that makes sense to the mere mortals in the audience. For how do you depict that which is too great, far too great, for human beings to grasp? It's basically impossible to show it directly, because again, if you zoom out long enough, space itself becomes an abstraction, it becomes unbound from all metric value. In fact, we already peer into the infinite expanse of space every single day without experiencing the full weight it represents. This is because, as author Douglas Adams once wrote, infinity itself looks flat and uninteresting. Looking up into the night sky is looking into infinity. Distance is incomprehensible and therefore meaningless. Because of this, he goes on, we respond much more strongly not to infinity, but to that which is just very, very, very big. So big that it gives the impression of infinity far better than infinity itself. But here as well lies a challenge for movies, because simply showing something that is very, very, very big is actually not that simple at all. It works when the object is only pretty big and you can just use human beings for scale. You can still do this when it's really big. Just look at how Gareth Edwards introduces Godzilla in the 2014 adaptation. We see a bunch of people looking out over the airport where suddenly... It's a reveal that works really well, but notice how it takes two shots. One that shows the human perspective and which only fits in Godzilla's foot, and another one that then uses that comparative relation to scale up and show the grand monster in its fullness. Edwards has always been particularly good at this. I still love the introduction of the Death Star in Rogue One, for example. Again, we start out with a small, more relatable perspective, juxtapose it in relation to something bigger, in this case, the iconic Star Destroyer, which is also given another comparison later to emphasize just how big it is. And then from there, it goes up one more step to reveal Basically, it's the same idea as those universe comparison videos. Show one thing relative to another, then show that other thing relative to something else. Humans relative to spaceship, spaceship relative to space, and so on. But as with the comparison videos, this gradual scaling only seems to work for so many steps though, and leaves us struggling once it goes too far. Remember how The Force Awakens tried to one-up the classics by taking the size of the Death Star and using it to unveil?
And this is Starkiller Base.
Why is it that, to me at least, this planet-sized weapon felt less impactful than its much smaller original template? Was it just one step too much? Maybe the Death Star was the sweet spot, big enough to convey true grandeur and power, but not so big that its size couldn't be shown and understood in relation to other elements. Compared to shots like these, Starkiller Base definitely feels unbound, hanging in a hollow space that diminishes a true understanding of scale, and therefore relies on that somewhat silly holograph for us to have some understanding of it at all. And perhaps more importantly, in the original trilogy, a space station the size of a small moon was already pushing the boundaries of believability a little bit, but it was still grounded enough within the narrative to be accepted as a meaningful part of this story universe. It has established powers and limitations, it was feared by the rebels, a crowning achievement for the Empire. In short, it wasn't just a sight to behold, it was a presence to feel something about. And this might be the real reason why Starkiller Base fell flat for me. It's not because it took the same concept and made it much bigger, but because it did it so inexplicably. And I don't just mean that in terms of believability, even though I do believe the whole idea is pretty ridiculous, even for a Star Wars movie. No, the point is that the exponential increase in scale doesn't really change the narrative that surrounds it. Sure, Starkiller Base can destroy like 5 planets at once instead of just one. And when it is ultimately destroyed, the big boom is much bigger than that of the Death Star. But other than that, the story remains basically the same. Despite ramping up the scale, there's no real sense of added reverence.
At this distance of 36 million miles, you are observing the sun at 2% of full brightness.
One of my favorite depictions of the unfathomable size of the universe comes from the 2007 movie Sunshine, which is about a group of astronauts who set out with a giant bomb to reignite our dying sun.
There is nothing, literally nothing more important than completing our mission.
Though its story remains limited to our own solar system, it does beautifully employ our central star as a bright burning metaphor for the universe in its entirety, and uses it specifically to emphasize just how incomprehensibly vast it is. There is the earlier discussed establishment of scale in visual terms. We often see the spaceship in relation to its destination, and there's a particularly beautiful moment where the crew watches the planet Mercury fly past the sun. It recalls the pale blue dot, the iconic photograph of Earth taken in 1990 by the Voyager 1 space probe from a distance of 6 billion kilometers, or 3.7 billion miles, which was later popularized by Carl Sagan, who has extensively reflected on the significance of this image.
Our posturings, our imagined self-importance, the delusion that we have some privileged position in the universe, are challenged by this point of pale light. Our planet is a lonely speck in the great enveloping cosmic dark.
Sunshine 2 continuously confronts us with our own grandiosity by explaining that whenever characters are staring into the sun, they're only seeing a fraction of its true luminance.
4% would result in irreversible damage to your retinas.
And by reminding us that if we were to be exposed to its full power, we would be instantly turned into stardust, leaving not a single trace of our existence. There is one character in particular, a psychologist named Searle, who keeps pushing this boundary, and who in doing so, perfectly captures that longing to connect with the mystery and the force of what is out there.
Darkness is an absence of something, it's a vacuum.
But total light envelops you. It becomes you.
While at the same time capturing the frustration of being so painfully trapped in a limited consciousness and a fragile, vulnerable body. The frustration of being such a tiny, minuscule creature within such a vast, endless expanse that we can barely perceive, let alone begin to explore in earnest. For that's the other thing about the vastness of our universe. It is not just defined by spatial dimensions, but also by a temporal one. On a cosmic scale, human beings not only occupy but an insignificantly small portion of space, we also exist for but an insignificantly brief amount of time, which is an issue that tends to give space exploration movies a major headache. We can go to the moon, Mars is also relatively doable, but beyond that, the sheer time it takes to traverse the kind of distances that space confronts us with becomes a serious obstacle.
Cooper's right. We need to think about time as a resource, just like oxygen and food going down there's going to cost us.
By now, the science fiction trickery used to work around the problem of time has become an all too familiar trope of the genre. I think we've all seen that pen and paper scene that explains how a wormhole works, which aside from the more fantastical notion of light-speed travel, is probably the most convenient way to quickly skip ahead stretches of space that would otherwise be uncrossable. The concept of cryogenic sleep also needs no explanation. In fact, most movies don't even bother to explain it, let alone really engage with it as a complicated technology that probably isn't the risk-free long-distance loophole it is so often presented as. Characters just settle in for that long nap, and lo and behold, a few years, decades, or even a few centuries later, they awake without having aged a day. And you know, that's fine. I understand space movies and space movie audiences are eager to get to the good stuff without having to be constantly reminded of and bothered with the limits of our being. And yet, even when treated as the most casual, everyday part of space travel, these narrative shortcuts never fully let us pretend that the vastness of the universe is somehow inviting. They never fully erase that gnawing awareness that maybe this is not a frontier that we are meant to pioneer into, that this is not an environment we belong in, that these dimensions far exceed the limitations we know and understand. One way or another, the cosmos always ends up imposing itself on us as a void without end, a force of infinity that cannot be reconciled with.
Time is relative, okay? It can stretch and it can squeeze, but it can't run backwards.
In this sense, space movies inevitably become just as much about the limited nature of humanity as they are about the unlimited nature of the universe. And as such, they can't help but transform into a dialogue, into a conversation with the cosmos in that if you stare long enough in the abyss stares back kind of way.
You spoke to me through her. You spoke with me from the sky, the trees.
We see this in an almost literal sense in Terrence Malick's existential masterpiece The Tree of Life, which opens with a quote from the Book of Job that reads, "Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth, when the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy?" Although clearly being framed in more religious terms, the movie, very much like the space movies we've been discussing, essentially engages in a direct discussion with the cosmos as the consciousness of its main character drifts through grand operatic visions from the birth of the universe to the end of time and to whatever lies beyond. Malick first seeks to humble us, to put us in our place, one reviewer wrote. Not, as Christianity might have it, in a misanthropic way, but through a simple contrast of space and time. We are small, and we are brief, he says with these first chapters. Do not presume you can understand it all. And it's with this context that the family drama then unfolds, which, despite being contrasted with extended sequences of cosmic grandeur, does not feel insignificant or cynical at all. Quite the opposite, in fact. Malick presents us a vision in which it is precisely because of this extreme juxtaposition that we can better understand our human condition, our suffering, our fear, the frustration of unanswered questions, and work through it in a way that also allows us to find some peace, allows us to see and experience the beauty of our smallness and brevity. It is, of course, but one answer, one suggested way of finding some reconciliation with the universe at large. But ultimately, the real point, the real purpose of framing humanity on that cosmic scale is that, when done well, when establishing a proper sense of size and by embedding its implications and meanings into the fabric of the narrative, that space movies remind us that there is something out there that will always transcend us, that will always be shrouded in mystery. For even if we were to reach the end of space, the end of time, we'd still only know the dimensions we can consciously perceive, and we'd still be left with the question of what lies beyond. Few movies have dared to venture here, dared to go where science can no longer reasonably guide us, and where all predictive simulations fall apart. Time stretched out over space, inconceivable cosmic events, the end of everything, the infinite. It's the place where speculation becomes imagination, and where science becomes poetry. But as such, it is perhaps also the one place where, for the briefest of moments, we can imagine ourselves reaching out and touching infinity. The experience, of course, cannot last. In the end, we will find ourselves back inside our limited trappings. But as we continue our ordinary everyday lives, we can bring that feeling with us, that awareness of the unknowable, the unfathomable, that frames our existence unlike anything else, that makes us reflect on ourselves in a way that we otherwise couldn't even conceive of, and that, in many ways, defines who we are as human beings. What we do with that then is up to us. As Malik writes at the end of his screenplay for The Tree of Life, the vision is not the journey, the real journey has yet to begin. Indeed, whatever the universe inspires within us, it all begins by looking up into that great cosmic dark and letting its grandeur fill us with awe and wonder.
Consider again that dot. That's here. That's home. That's us. On it, everyone you love, everyone you know, everyone you ever heard of, every human being who ever was, lived there, on the mote of dust, suspended in a sunbeam.
Let me guess. The surface of the sun? Only dream I ever have. Every time I shut my eyes, it's always the same.
At the end of time, a moment will come when just one man remains. Then the moment will pass. Man will be gone. There will be nothing to show that we were ever here but stardust. A last man, alone with God.
Do not go gentle into that good night. Old age should burn and rave at close of day. Rage, rage against the dying of the light.
I don't know what space exploration will uncover, but I don't think it'll be exploration just for the sake of exploration. I think it'll be more the fact that it allows us to see things that maybe we should have seen a long time ago, but just haven't been able to until now.
It's not just cinema that has tried to capture and make sense of the grand cosmic scale that dwarfs our comparatively tiny existence. Recent video games have utilized their fast-growing technological capabilities to try and realize, with varying degrees of ambition, the ultimate space game. But somewhat paradoxically, as the scale of these simulations gets bigger and bigger, they have also made more and more concessions to ensure that experience remains a playable one, which in turn undermines the very promise of what they set out to do in the first place. Can game design reckon with this contradiction, or is the promise of the ultimate space game simply an impossible one? These questions and more are explored in the full companion video that is exclusively available on Nebula, which for this month only, you can get a lifetime membership to that extends until the end of the universe. Or the end of our limited being. Whichever comes first. Do note that this is not the cheapest option, that would still be the annual description with the 40% discount from my creator link. Why go for lifetime then? Well, as you know, Nebula has been building a new creator ecosystem that lets us work and grow within a supportive community and that gives us a fair compensation. Remember, for everyone who signs up using my link, a significant portion of that monthly contribution goes directly to me. In return, Nebula lets you experience our work in its purest form, that is, without any ads or sponsors, and lets you enjoy a ton of exclusive content. Aside from the companion piece to this essay, I also have a series of videos that you can't find anywhere else. Also, last year, Nebula flew me all the way out to New York to help me produce my class on story analysis, which I couldn't have possibly made on my own, not with this kind of production value. And this is exactly the stuff that you'll be seeing a lot more of as a lifetime member. Because through this one-time contribution, you'll not only be directly and very generously supporting me, you'll also be investing in a more sustainable and quality-driven ecosystem in which creators don't have to stress about pleasing the advertisers, and instead solely have to focus on creating the best possible content for you. So again, if you want to help us reach for the stars, consider our limited lifetime membership offer, or feel free to sign up for a regular annual subscription. You'll be supporting my work either way. Thanks for watching.